Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Eileen Dondero Foley City Council chambers for tonight's work sessions. There are two, the Fire and Police Department budgets. The first is going to be the Fire Department, and the second will be the Police. I will just also advise you in advance that there'll be a brief recess in the middle for a changing of placards and such. And with that, I'll turn it over to the City Manager.
Thank you, Your Honor. As we have done with the municipal budgets and the school department budgets, we will go through the fire department budget after the chief has had an opportunity to give a brief overview of his proposal and the commission's proposal. Just a couple of housekeeping items that the City Council recessed the public hearing on the budget to May 11th, and that will be reopened at 7 p.m. on May 11th, and at that time the public will be able to come out to speak on the budgets. In addition, there will be another work session of the City Council on May 13th to finalize some of their deliberations as it relates to the overall budget. And it is my hope that the City Council will be able to act on the budget sometime in early June. We do have a few external factors that we're still waiting to get information on, and that deals primarily with the state budget. The State Senate is working on their version of the budget right now. We assume it will go to a conference committee, and hopefully certainly by the end of June they will have a budget, but there are things in there that could affect the City Council's decision process as it relates to the revenue side of the budget. So, but the dates that are absolute are the date on the public hearing, which is May 11th, and May 13th for the work session to determine what the overall budget will look like and then sometime in June for the formal resolutions of the budget by the City Council. As everybody is aware, under our charter, the council must adopt the city budget by June 30, or the budget that was presented by the city manager becomes law. That's extremely unlikely. So, but I think it may be that the council may want to wait a little bit on the budget, depending on what's happening at the state Senate. So, and the overall state legislature. So. That's where we're at, Your Honor, and I guess the chief is up and the fire commission.
Thank you, and if you could, even though I could introduce you here, it's better if you introduce yourselves because people won't match my speech with your placard, which they can't read on TV. So could you just introduce yourselves, fire commissioners, and...
Sure. Michael Hughes, fire commissioner. Paul Wentworth, fire commissioner.
Richard Gamester, fire commissioner.
Christopher Leclerc, fire chief.
Chief, if you please.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Portsmouth Fire Commission was asked to bring in a fire department budget for fiscal year 2010 at a 0% increase, and the commission complied. As the council is aware, there is very little room for error in the fire department budget. As our job is extremely laborious, our budget reflects the costs associated with labor. Personnel costs account for 95% of the budget, with very little left for fuel, utilities, equipment, etc. The current budget allows for a minimum staffing of 13 personnel day and night. Any fluctuation in costs, such as an increase in call volume or the seriousness and duration of those calls, will immediately impact the fiscal year 10 budget. Any vacancies due to injury or illness will also negatively affect the budget, along with disaster response, whether man-made or natural, severe storms, or other events that require callback of personnel will also negatively affect the budget. Although the fire department and the commission recognize the need for financial constraint in this economic downturn, the mission of the city's fire department has not changed. We will still be expected to respond to and mitigate any emergency that affects the city, and we will do so with the same level of professionalism and dedication that the residents of Portsmouth have come to expect. However, the minimum staffing of the fire department should never be below 13 personnel per shift. This number only provides for engine and ladder staffing of 3, where national standards call for 4. This number allows for only 2 of the city's 3 ambulances to be staffed with 2 firefighters, and the third ambulance should be staffed and able to respond both for medical emergencies and for fire responses. Ambulances cannot respond with less than 2 personnel. Each shift has 14 personnel assigned to it, and we do not cover the first vacancy. Any other vacancies must be filled to maintain the level of service at 13. Should the funding be reduced or become insufficient, a district's ambulance or engine company could be taken out of service, or could even result in a station closing for the shift. Therefore, should any of these situations occur, we would be forced to come back to council for additional funding. The 0% budget takes into account increases in step increases, health insurance, and retirement that were absorbed into the budget, which affected that narrow margin even further. And with that, I entertain any questions on the operation.
Thanks, Chief. Questions, comments from city councilors? Councilor Dwyer.
Just a couple little budget things. One, and actually this may be a question for Judy, and it relates to the police as well. I know in the school budget presentation of job descriptions and salary, one of the things that I thought was helpful this year is that they, amounts included longevity, steps, stipends within the amount itself, so that one could actually see what the array looked like. Is there a reason we don't do that for fire and police?
The school department is the only one that includes the longevity. That's how their contract is written. So it is not part of any other municipal budget as it relates to the individual. So we have a separate line item for longevity.
That lumps it all together. But in other words, it would be possible on a person-by-person basis to kind of
We
see
could, yes.
what it would look like. I think that would be actually helpful for the council to have, because it helps then in looking at real costs.
Well, the one thing I would say is we could probably make it, and we can talk about it for next budget. What we could probably do is I prefer to do it more of as an appendix to the budget, because
Sure.
you want to have the real, salary numbers here.
Sure.
Because you don't want to mix and match, because the public's looking at it as well.
Right.
So you don't want that to be commingled. But we could do an appendix that could show everybody's with the other, stipends, and things of that sort, in an appendix in the book, which I think would probably be more useful, because then we could label it and say, in this appendix, the following is included in everybody's, and we could do, we literally could probably do all, the benefits and everything. So why don't you let us talk about that, and for the next budget, we can maybe add that as an appendix. That way, you can get a full flavor for what a cost of an individual.
And it's more the
employee is.
equivalence, because you're looking at one department with it in it and other departments not.
Right. So we can do that. I think it probably would help about as an appendix.
Councilors, we don't need a motion, but obviously that seems helpful to everybody. It'll create yet another award-winning budget for clarity, I am sure. Councilor Dwyer.
In the increase in the part-time salaries, what role is that being increased for? Where are you increasing hours?
That is our part-time account clerk, and that she handles the overload from the one civilian employee that we have in the fire department that handles all of our payroll, accounts receivable, everything, our budget coordination, all of that. We have a part-time account clerk that handles the overflow of that, but also handles the ambulance billing, which brings us in about $500,000 in revenue every year. And the clearer those records are when they go off to the billing company, with the proper forms signed, the better off we are. With the workload that we've had, she's still part-time, but we've accounted for more hours. She's very, very efficient.
And I think I remember somewhere, maybe it was in your presentation overall, that the billing percentage has improved.
Yes.
Councilor Hedmonic.
I've got a couple, maybe small questions. One being, the salaries go up about 1% or $30,000, and I wonder, are those the step increases? You're not hiring anybody again.
The only thing included in the budget is the step increases for existing personnel. There are no
The
wage
step
increases.
increases.
There are no
Okay.
wage increases.
Second question being, you're budgeting a fairly substantial reduction in overtime, and I wondered, do you have a program or a plan to achieve that, or were there unusual things this year?
Whenever you see a reduction in overtime, it's reduction in available staffing. The budget is mainly personnel and costs associated with personnel. There's very little to trim out of operating that hasn't been trimmed already. Whenever there is a number set by the council on what budgets they're shooting for, the overtime accounts tend to take the hit. And what we have to do is, we used to have 14-day a night. The council wanted us to keep 14 at night. We no longer have that. This budget presents 13-13, where we will have one person out potentially on every shift. So the more overtime is reduced, the less staffing we'll have.
Councilor Kennedy, then Councilor Dwyer.
When looking at this budget, I had a question. It looks like we went up by one person last year. I know you said that in numbers. I just want to point that out to the community, that it looks like we went from, in the paramedic firefighter division, we went from 61 to 62, from 14 to 15 people in '09. So we haven't let anyone go or anything. So I think we're still going to be giving the same quality of service, unless I'm wrong.
That may be someone who gained a paramedic certification that was already on staff. We still have 61 authorized positions. We have had temporary hires to help offset overtime for long-term vacancies, but we have not changed our allotment or gone to the
Then you
council.
might want to clarify to me that why it says total full-time positions went from 61 to 62 from fiscal year '08 to '09.
When the position went up from fiscal year '08, that was the year that we brought on the fire inspector in the fire prevention division.
Additional questions? Counselor Dwyer, I think you were up.
I just wanted to follow up Jerry's question. So I presume then the reduction in the retirement account is related to that reduction in overtime?
Right. The less overtime we spend, the less assorted costs go with that. And again, if overtime goes up, those costs have to be figured in as well.
Counselor Dwyer.
But unless Counselor Kennedy wants to follow up her own question, I don't think the chart shows what you said, because I know we all agreed last year to add the fire inspector, but it also shows that the fire inspector was there in the previous year, and the increase is shown in the firefighters, not in the fire inspector. So I think that just is what's maybe confusing us a little bit in terms of personnel available to man shifts.
Maybe I can try to clarify that. We had, and I won't get into too much of it, but we had a long-term illness in the department.
Okay, so it's an internal.
And so what we did, and Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, but we had a long-term illness that we felt, the chief felt and the commission felt, that because of that illness, that there would have been constant overtime, and there was the anticipation of retirements happening, and the analysis was done that because of this long-term illness, that we would we would hire a new person with the anticipation that by the time the individual got back to work, that we would have a retirement that would fill that slot. Is that a correct assumption,
Correct,
Chief?
yes.
So
Counselor Kennedy,
follow up
continue
on
with
that.
that.
did we not have retirement? Because we still have an extra person. I guess I'm perplexed, because we still have an extra person. Did we not let someone go, or?
Well, maybe an error in that graph.
We'll take a look at it and
that.
just make sure. Yeah, but, because I think when we put it together, we had that extra person on because we were anticipating a retirement. I believe a retirement has occurred by June 30th, hasn't it, Chief?
Yeah, we have with two retirements coming up, but we have hired, as I said, temporary people to fill long-term vacancies to offset overtime.
Which would then become permanent when we had retirements.
Correct.
Right,
Got it, okay.
but we'll check that number.
Counselor Noblin Claiborne.
First, I would like to thank the fire department for coming in at 0%. I think everyone on the city council appreciates that. And I just have a question. The fireboat, has that been a successful entity for the fire department?
It's been very successful. We have a majority of our personnel trained on operation of the boat. Some have some are certified operators, others are trained as deckhands. They've all had the Coast Guard safety course. It's been a great boon to the city. We've been out on the water several times for rescues, and we've even obtained some funding from the Peace Development Authority to help offset training and maintenance costs for that boat. So
And
we're
I
glad to
just
have it.
Okay, good. And I have one other question. The training and education is down 5,000 from last year. Is that going to have a significant effect on the fire department? Did I look at that right? It was 10,000 in '09, and it will be 5,000 in '10.
And again,
education.
on those lines, some of the lines that we're able to adjust, and we look at historical perspectives of what we spent in the past, what specialized training we have coming up, what recertifications we have coming up in a certain year, and how much money we'll need. So we try to get the lines as correct as possible, but it is a bottom line budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else from the council? Counselor
Just
Edmond?
question maybe to this end of the table. There's about 560,000 ambulance service charges. Are those credited to the fire department, or they're
No, they're in as a general revenue,
general revenue? So, okay. So there's
like
no
any
credit
other
to the
revenue
fire
that comes in. The chief would like to see it.
I'm just want to clarify.
As well.
Additional question, Counsel Kennedy.
I have to agree too. I'm really pleased that you guys could come in at 0%, and I know the taxpayers really appreciate it. So you guys were one of the first to come in, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Additional comments? With that, I will offer thanks as well. We do not take for granted that it was difficult to get to 0. We do not naturally expect it. We know that it is truly the wailing and gnashing of teeth with good reason. So we appreciate the hard work and your patience. And with that, we'll call a brief recess. Thank you, Fire Commission and Chief Leclerc, and we'll ask the police to set up once we come back from that. Back on the record, welcome, in this instance, to the second half of the work session, now with the Police Commission and Police Chief. If, just before the City Manager has at it and sets the stage, I'd like it if you could just identify yourselves on the record, and then we'll move on.
I'm Jerry Howe, Chair of the Portsmouth Police Commission.
I'm John Gollum, Police Commissioner.
John Russo, Police Commissioner.
Mike Bagnett, Chief of Police.
Len DeSessa, Deputy Chief.
Karen Senecal, Budget Coordinator.
How about Lou? Or is he's manning the piano down there, so he doesn't. Okay. All right. I thank you very much. We'll turn it over to the city manager, and we'll get rolling.
Thank you, Your Honor. I want to say that as we've been going through the budget process, it has been a difficult one to try to have people achieve the no increase over fiscal '09. And with the initial budget that was submitted by the Police Commission did have an increase of approximately $124,000. And I know they were working hard to bring to you some proposed changes to that. Just from a housekeeping standpoint, what will happen is that if after their presentation there are reductions that they're proposing, then we would formally do that during your budget final vote in the resolution. Certainly, if there are reductions, which I expect there would be, that we can bring those in informationally, get the information from the police department, and when the finance director puts together the final resolutions for the budget, those will be reflected in there. Certainly, the City Council at its May 13th meeting could do other things if they wanted to, but that would be the direction you would give me at that time. I want to just take the opportunity to thank the Commission. I did attend one of their meetings when they were discussing this. They had to make some tough choices, which many of us already have, but they have moved forward with a proposal that the Chief will be presenting, and I think will achieve our goals. Chief?
Chief Magnan.
Before the chief.
Commissioner Howe.
Could I
Please do.
address the council? It's a pleasure to be here again, meeting with you about the budget. As the city manager said, our original proposal is 1.37%. When we had the public hearing, we had gotten our budget down to 0.42%. And since the public hearing, we have been working as a commission and working with the city manager, and I would like to thank him for his help in our efforts. And we will be proposing to you tonight a budget of 0% increase.
Thank you for saying that, and thank you, and I hope you tell us what it means, but we don't take it for granted, and I'm sure you'll hear from other councilors. That's very nice.
There were many difficult things. The fact that the school department cut funding for one of the SROs, which put that back in our lap, or let someone go, and it was the goal of the council to have no layoffs. So we had to absorb that within our budget. And I'll let the chief address the specifics. I'm sure he's sick of looking at the numbers, but.
Chief.
Thank you very much. I know Commissioner Howe said it was a pleasure to be here with you this evening. I would like to echo that. But I do have a ticket for the Doobie Brothers at the Music Hall tonight, so I hope to get there by the time that they do their encore.
It's always the best part, Chief.
They had a big hit in the 80s, right? The Police Are Just All Right With Me, I think, was the big hit. Mayor, councilors, city manager. I'd like to go through a presentation this evening, and we reviewed this presentation this afternoon. And what struck me about this is it's not just a presentation about the police department, it's a presentation about your city as well. So thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to talk to you about some of the services that we provide, our calls for service, some of the things that have helped make us an award-winning police department over the years, and then, of course, we'll talk about the budget. Our number one goal day in and day out is to provide an environment in which crime and disorder do not flourish. We do this very successfully through a philosophy that we adopted called community-oriented policing. And it's an approach to law enforcement that is grounded in the belief that we, the police, are part of our community and that we must work in partnership with those we serve. It's a very work-intensive philosophy, but it's effective in policing. And its goal is to ensure that we combat problems in their infancy before they evolve into serious crimes and serious disorder. Policing Portsmouth provides a number of unique challenges, among them events which can draw as many as 75,000 people, a school system with 6 campuses with more than 2,600 students, a major university right up the road, the International Trade Port, which now provides over 8,000 jobs, and a very vibrant hospitality industry. We have become over the years not only a hub community but a destination as well, and it's estimated that we have a service population of approximately 65,000 people. To establish and support the environment where you're going to safely enjoy all that Portsmouth has to offer, we need to provide security, we need to provide traffic control, we need to provide a quick response to crime and disorder, and we need to do it effectively, and we need to do it efficiently. The resident and seasonal population is our 24/7 responsibility. We protect 6,879 homes and 1,474 businesses, and our 3, soon to be 2, school resource officers serve and protect 2,637 students. We also have a 24/7 responsibility to our visitors, to the homeless, to the elderly, to the mentally ill. Our community policing emphasizes beat ownership. This means officers are responsive and proactive with speeding complaints, with noise complaints, well-being checks, suspicious activity, truancy, doing security evaluations for businesses, and any other issues that might come up within their geographical zones. The environment of a Portsmouth police officer or a detective or a dispatcher is substantially different than that of the average citizen or tourist or business person. What do I mean by this? When you see a water park, we see fertile ground for child predators, thieves, and fights. We make sure all incidents are handled quickly and decisively so Water Country continues to enjoy its excellent reputation as a family park. Where you see Market Square Day, the 4th of July, Christmas Parade, or the Memorial Day Parade as carefree and fun, we're very mindful of traffic and safety, of drunk and disorderly persons, lost or separated children, and in this post-9/11 world, potential of terrorist target, or even now the issue of mass shootings. The grocery store where you buy your food may have been the target of several robberies. The restaurant or bar you enjoy the scene of a fight or a DWI arrest. Your clothing store, the victim of graffiti. Mind you, this is in a city that has been awarded all kinds of national accolades as being one of the best, safest, prettiest, and according to Cosmo magazine, one of the hottest places to live. However, the reality is we still encounter dangerous people out there. Your police department has 3 divisions: the Bureau of Patrol, the Bureau of Investigative Services, and the Bureau of Administrative Services. So a real quick snapshot of some of our numbers. Serious crime does continue to keep us busy. As you can see, we made over 100 arrests last year for narcotics and other drug abuse cases. Just a word about the rape cases that you see up there. In many of them, alcohol is a factor. In the last few years, I've been reporting that roughly a third of our arrests are alcohol related. This year, we're seeing that that trend is more likely to be 40%. Identity theft is ongoing and a growing issue for us, and these are difficult, complex cases to investigate. As you can see, week in and week out, DWI arrests keep our officers busy. We handled approximately 39,000 calls for service last year. This is a slight increase over recent years. We made 1,447 arrests. About 150 of them were felonies. We're responsible for the protective custody of 232 highly intoxicated people. We had 629 noise complaints last year. Quality of life issues play a big part in what we do, and here's why. Quality of life is one of the areas where Portsmouth wins big when we make those lists of best places to live or best places to visit or work. This in turn seems to translate into economic health and vitality. So while quality of life, things like noise and disorder, don't make big headlines, they do impact your home life and your property value, so we place close attention to them. I direct your attention to the upper right-hand corner of this slide. These numbers never cease to amaze me. Lafayette Road, 22,000 cars on any given day, 19,000 on Islington Street, 10,000 on Maplewood Avenue, 8,000 on Elwyn Road. Simple math here for just these roads I just listed. 60,000 cars traveling on our city streets. And keep in mind that we have a resident population of 21,000. These numbers reflect people coming in to town to work, to shop, and to visit. That's the 65,000 service population that we quote each year. We're responsible for the safety of these people, and I'm very pleased to report to you that personal injury accidents are down 43% this year. How is it that we can have this much traffic on our city streets and still have our accidents decrease so significantly over the last year? How did we do it? For one thing, our traffic enforcement is up 60%. For another, our traffic enforcement is not random. We use data in order to drive our enforcement. We have a program that we call STEP, which is a selective traffic enforcement program, which uses information from a device that we call a stealth stat, and also information that we get from neighborhoods to target our enforcement efforts, such as speeding, red light violations, crosswalk patrols. And we combine that with preventive and educational efforts as well, public service announcements, our speed sign that we deploy. And as I stated, personal injury accidents are down 43%, property damage accidents are down 4%. Alcohol continues to drive a lot of what we do. As I said, it was a factor in 40% of all of our arrests last year. Nationwide, DWI checkpoints have shown themselves to be a proven deterrent. In fact, they are the only proven deterrent to people making the decision to get behind the wheel of a car after they've had too much to drink. You've heard me talk about alcohol density and about the research that shows both the correlation between alcohol and crime and the correlation between alcohol density and crime. While we made 122 DWI arrests last year, as the slide shows, we're not in the business of arresting people. We're in the business of preventing people from getting hurt or even killed while they're on our roadways, which is why we are the leaders in the Seacoast area when it comes to conducting sobriety checkpoints. And I believe that this is one of the reasons that we have now gone 9 years in a community that has more liquor licenses than any other city or town in the state without an alcohol-related fatality. And what's more, we're not alone in feeling this way about checkpoints. The public feels this way as well. I literally have hundreds of these, and these are surveys that we give out to every motorist that goes through our checkpoint, and 99% of them are positive in supporting what we're doing out there. Because of the demands made on the department are varied and complex, I'd like to turn your attention for a moment to a different area of activity that goes on alongside the daily patrol work. I'm referring to the special teams, which require officers with specialized skills and training. For example, our drug recognition experts, are an important piece in our DWI checkpoints that I talked about. Our K-9 unit, the accident investigation team, our Seacoast emergency response team, summarized here are all special resources that allow us to respond and investigate calls and events which are beyond the level of a street patrol officer. And it seems to me, based on 30 years of observation, that when the economy tanks, our workload goes up. While there will always be that element of the population that does not hold itself to the rule of law, hard economic times seem to compel an increase in criminal behavior. I've already referred to alcohol-driven crime and disorder, but speeding, thefts, vandalism, people who prey on the public, graffiti, and other quality of life issues, such as noise, are our daily reality. I draw your attention to the gentleman on the left-hand side of the screen, Mr. Morgan, Portsmouth resident in May of 2008. He has 10 convictions for operating after suspension, 4 convictions for being a habitual offender, and 7 convictions for driving while intoxicated. You may not know Mr. Morgan, but my officers do. 2 years ago, I warned that police departments have become the caregivers of last resort to the chronically homeless population, many of whom are mentally ill or addicted to drugs and alcohol. I expressed my concern that we have a duty of care for these people, but they didn't belong in the criminal justice system. And I'm pleased to report to you that the Portsmouth Mental Health Court became a reality in 2008 after many hours and much hard work. Approximately a dozen individuals have already been diverted from the criminal justice system and into the community mental health care system where they belong. And I'm also pleased to report that we have 2 officers, Officer Keaveney and Officer Myers, who have received crisis intervention training to give them the skills that they need to specifically deal with the mentally ill. Hopefully, in the future, given the budget constraints that we have, we'll be able to train all officers and create our own crisis intervention team. Next slide. Nearly 45,000 phone calls came into your police department last year. And when these people in crisis called for help, our dispatchers were there to answer, whether it was 2 p.m. or 2 a.m. Take a look at the sheer volume of work posted on this slide. The dedicated men and women in this center have consistently worked 12-hour shifts and 16-hour shifts to ensure that police and fire posts are covered. In fact, last year, there were hundreds of extended hours of forced overtime shifts due to personnel shortages. And at this time, we still have 2 vacant dispatcher positions, one of which we will not fill because of the strains of this budget year. Our Bureau of Investigative Services is made up of several different divisions: General Investigations, Family Services, Special Investigations Unit, our Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, School Resource Officers, and the monitoring of sex offenders. Our detectives have been very busy with the thefts of precious metals. In early 2008, one business alone experienced a $30,000 loss in the theft of catalytic converters. 2 businesses suffered a combined theft of almost $10,000 in copper. Robberies and computer-related crimes have also kept us busy. We recently got a conviction in the heroin overdose death case that received notoriety in the media as the Red Sox party death. And today, we actually received an award from the county attorney for our investigation into that matter. We arrested the people who were responsible for over 30 of the commercial burglaries that were committed in Portsmouth. The nature of securing and processing crime scene drains our detective resources. There is no CSI in New Hampshire. We do it all. How well this is done can determine the outcome of a case. Every month, the court report to the police commission is thick with convictions of guilty pleas secured by our prosecutors. And this success is a direct result of crime scene processing and case investigation by your detectives. Call to your attention the paper today, case of Patrick Allen, 4-year-old case where he committed over $25,000 in vandalism to the North Church and breaking out the historic stained glass windows. We solved that case through DNA. Scams abound as tough economy prevails. The headline would seem to confirm my earlier statement. This is another area that drains the resources in our Bureau of Investigations. Fake chimney sweeps, a fake Canadian lottery, and a fake Medicare program, among others, have passed through the area and preyed upon our residents. This is more than just the theft of money or identity. For our elderly residents in particular, it's an upsetting experience that shatters their sense of security and their sense of safety. We pursue convictions because convictions deter scam artists. Your family services detectives are involved in child abuse cases, domestic violence cases, truancy issues, elder abuse, online child sexual exploitation. This can be grisly work for those dedicated men and women. I can tell you firsthand that the online images are brutal. As in other areas of detective work, your police department has distinguished itself as a leader in the successful investigation and pursuit of these criminals. This is an actual online conversation between an undercover detective and an online predator who believes he's talking to a young girl. Cool Man 32 is the suspect that we're talking about. Little One is the undercover officer. Notice how quickly Cool Man, the predator, gains personal information and attempts to find out the location of his intended victim. Look at the last line, so you'll be all alone. Our detective division has been a pioneer in the work of internet crimes against children, and we continue to invest in the complex training and resources without which we could not investigate and prosecute these criminals. In a survey conducted in 2007, nearly half of our high school students reported that they had been binge drinking within the 30 days prior to the survey. Well over half had reported some use of alcohol within the month prior to the survey. We are very active in this area. Portsmouth detectives have been extremely successful over the years in the area of underage drinking through initiatives like compliance checks at more than 100 stores and restaurants, working with owners and managers to curb underage parties at hotels and motels, conducting the unique Now That You're 16 education classes at our high school, hosting underage drinking information nights for parents, and participating in celebration graduation. Research shows that a combination of aggressive enforcement and education works best, and I'm happy to report that we've seen the compliance rate for refusing to sell to underage buyers improve from 80% to 96%. And in 2008, your police department was the recipient of the Law Enforcement Partner of the Year Award from the Federal Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention, specifically for our work in combating underage drinking. We currently have 39 registered sex offenders in our community. We're vigilant about keeping tabs on each and every one. A new law passed last year requires them to register more frequently, quarterly instead of annually, which in turn requires us to commit the necessary resources to make sure that this happens. If they don't register, we track them down. Let me give you a snapshot of what I'm talking about. In January of 2008, we arrested Elvin Mayo for failure to report and breach of bail. On May 27, it was Glenn Smart for failure to report. On July 4th, it was Jesse Bill for failure to report. On August 14, Jeremy Semberborn was arrested on 5 counts of prohibited child care as a convicted offender. On October 25th, Charles Paul was arrested for failure to register. 3 days later, Barry White was arrested for failure to register. And the day after that, James Green was arrested for failure to report. This is high-maintenance activity. It takes time, training, and a dedicated detective to stand between you and the sex offender. Our elderly are among our most vulnerable citizens. Interacting with them in the context of a crime requires compassion, skill, and training. Protecting them and working to remove any climate of fear is a priority in our community-oriented policing approach. Again, this takes a multidimensional kind of police officer, as well as the resources to train and develop the skills that are required. Suicides. There were 4 suicides in Portsmouth last year and another 55 attempts. This is an increase of 20% over the previous year. Responding to these emotionally charged, high-stakes calls is a regular reality for us as police officers. On August 8th of last year alone, emergency responders went out to 5 attempted suicide calls within a 24-hour period. Sometimes these desperate people try to force a responding officer to use deadly force, and then you have the nightmare that we call suicide by cop. In 2007, we had 2 of these events occur within a week of each other, and another one as recently as this past February. Each actual suicide call that we respond to is a crime scene. How can one live in New Hampshire and not talk about the weather? Our work is not just about crime. When natural disaster strikes, it affects everyone. Whether it's a flood or an ice storm, the families of police, fire, and our DPW workers are affected, along with the general population. During the recent ice storm, our officers' families were also without heat, they were without power, they were without running water, their cellars were flooding, yet the officers left their damaged home, they left their families to serve and protect you and your families in your hour of need, and they did an outstanding job responding to crisis after crisis, some for 36 hours straight. Within the police department, everyone from the top on down jumped into cruises and patrolled and answered calls. Even our Explorer cadets were involved. Not one single burglary took place during that time, even though the city was without electricity and scores of homes and businesses in Portsmouth were vulnerable. This was because your police department gave you an all-hands-on-deck response. And as you know, the city has garnered a host of awards and recognition since 1997. These include Money Magazine's Best Places to Live, 4th place in 20 Best Towns in America from Outside Magazine, National Geographic's 6th Most Historic Place in America, top 12 distinctive destinations, one of the best small cities for startup companies according to Business Week last year. And again, as I mentioned, Cosmo Magazine's one of the hottest cities to live in. What does that mean for us, for the police department? It means more challenges. It means managing the impact of growth. Building permit activity from 2001 to 2008 shows an increase from 693 permits to 896. This is a 29% increase. All I can say is the city must be approving the right projects because of the awards we're getting. It does have to be remembered, however, that as city policymakers vote to change the landscape of Portsmouth, it also changes the scope of demands that are placed upon its police department and our resources. Here is a partial list of recent and pending projects: Bed Bath & Beyond, the Christmas Tree Shop, Portwalk Place, Crossroads House, Route 33 construction, the Meadowbrook Inn reconfiguration, the the Bow Street project, the expansion at Portsmouth Hospital, new restaurants like Rira, the Lafayette School senior housing, Pier 2 condos, and now on the drawing board, the Ramsey Hotel project on Kearsarge Way, and much more coming in 2010. To quote from the union leader when Michael Addison was convicted of murdering Officer Michael Briggs, "When your job is to enforce the law and protect the public from bad people, conflict inevitably arises. Sometimes that conflict leads to violence. In those instances, the individual officer is the lone buffer between the public and the violent criminal." At the swearing-in ceremony for new officers, I remind them of the gravity of the oath that they are taking. I remind them that they will have the authority to take away a person's liberty, to take away a person's property, and in dire circumstances, their lives. In a job where the stakes are this high, it's imperative that all candidates be vigorously screened. We simply cannot and will not cut corners in this process. And as you can see from this slide, the recruiting and training process is an intense and time-consuming investment, and we find ourselves drawing from a shrinking pool of qualified candidates. I guess I don't need to tell you that police work is a high-liability profession. Officers must be trained in the latest tactics, procedures, and skills in dealing with a growing and diverse community. And as I showed you earlier in the program, when I talked about Officer Myers and Keaveney, who have taken on the special skills needed to deal with the homeless and chronically addicted, today's successful police officer candidate has to possess a complex mix of traits and skills in addition to a sound mind and character. Having the wherewithal to screen and properly train officers translates into an award-winning police department, which begets a safe city to live in, to work in, and visit. And these are some of the people who make up that award-winning department. These are successful, committed officers who, in addition to putting themselves in harm's way for the sake of others, have diligently invested many hours in schooling, practice, and study to be better officers, to do more, to excel. Community service is integral to community policing. Our officers do ride-alongs for Leadership Seacoast. They coach sports in our schools. They continue the very successful PAL basketball program for both boys and girls during the summer season. They take time out to share a meal with and comfort our senior citizens. They run in the Special Olympics torch run each year, and they're active in fundraising for several Seacoast area charities and social service agencies. And if you tune to the Channel 11 auction next week, you'll see our officers there manning the phones. This requires officers who are willing to put in extra hours as well as their own time when necessary. This year, our Citizens Police Academy is in full session, and 2 of our city councilors are taking advantage of this fun and interesting opportunity to get a behind-the-scenes look and learn about your police department. I encourage you to talk with them and plan on becoming part of next year's class. And now the part you've been waiting for, our budget. This is where we started when we put our budget together. This was a static service budget. What would it take to provide the same level of service next fiscal year as this fiscal year without adding any new programs or any new people? We ended up with an overall need of $271,643, or 3.15% to stay level funded. As you can see, the bulk of this amount goes into our retirement account and also our health insurance and our workers' comp premiums. And as I remind you, each year the majority of our budget goes to support our personnel through wages and benefits. When faced with making significant reductions in a budget that is made up like ours, there are really only 2 places that you can carve out significant amounts of money, and that's by removing people and or programs. I'd like to just take a moment to review with the council some of the personnel changes that were made over the last decade. We used to have a human resources manager position, and we downgraded that to a secretary's position. A youth advocate, which was full-time, which we made part-time. We combined 2 positions in our records business division into 1 and created the office manager's position. We downgraded our accounting assistant's positions to a clerk's position. We reduced the secretary in our family services division from full-time to part-time, and we've been forced to leave this position vacant, adding that workload to the BIS secretary. We transferred a detective out of BIS back to patrol. We eliminated our community relations captain. We downgraded a personnel and training sergeant and made it a non-ranking patrol position. We transferred a detective sergeant back to the line. We downgraded 2 captains to patrol sergeant's positions. We downgraded the personnel and training captain to a lieutenant's position. In order to pick up some of the workload created by reducing the complement of ranking officers from 19 to 17, we created a position for crime analysis and statistical quality control. Last year's discussion with the City Council about merging jobs did not fall on deaf ears. With the resignation of our information systems manager, we had an opportunity to explore restructuring of services in our IT division. Working with Diana Fogarty, Captain Furlan was able to consolidate this position by adding work responsibilities to 2 existing employees, accompanied by support from the city's IT department. This has resulted in a savings to the police department's budget of $44,000 and an overall savings for the city of almost $65,000. In the unfolding squeeze of the budget process, the commission wanted to meet the city council's goal of no increase. So we went to work trying to find ways to reduce our budget by 3.15%, or $271,643. And as I said earlier, we eliminated the IT manager's position. We reduced the animal control officer's position from full-time to part-time. We cut our church traffic details, which we've been doing since 1955. We eliminated the part-time youth advocate position. We reduced other operating expenses by $8,900, and we reduced our overtime allocation by $43,000. And we ended up still with a budget that was 1.45% over last fiscal year, which equated to $124,600. And this is the budget that the commission had submitted to the city manager and to the city council. After submitting this budget, we were notified by the school department that they were eliminating their funding for their share of the elementary school resource officer. The reality of this is that we now had to absorb another $35,000 into our budget and come up with that money. On the heels of this revelation, the governor came out with his budget, which the city manager has talked about, and the commission decided again that they wanted to go back to the drawing board and try to hit that 0% target. But this meant we now had to find another $160,000, which equated to a 1.5% decrease. We decided to eliminate the funding for the National Night Out program. We decided to reduce our budget for the Explorer program, that we reduced the budget for our car seat safety program, reduce our training budget by $11,500, that we would cut 3 auxiliary police officer positions, that we would not fund a full-time dispatcher position, and would also not fund a police officer position. We ended up still at less than 0.5%, or $40,787. And it was at this point that the city manager and the finance director took a look at our health stabilization fund, calculating into the formula that we would have 4 less positions, which produced a savings of $39,600. The remaining $1,100 left to reduce was split between membership dues and professional services. Real quickly, I want to give you an overview of our staffing levels over the last 2 decades. And as you can see from this chart, in 1988, we had 63 city-funded positions. In 2003, we had 64.5 city-funded positions. And going into FY10, after the proposed cuts, we have 65.65 city-funded positions. This is a net gain of less than 3 officers over the last 20 years. I ask you to contrast that with the changes that Portsmouth has undergone in the last 20 years. Every budget season, we're asked about our use of overtime dollars, yet in the matrix study that the city commissioned in 2005, it was learned that Portsmouth was well within the median of other police departments. You can see clearly from this slide that when our staffing goes down, our overtime goes up. We're a 24/7 operation, 365 days a year, providing a public safety for the city. And there's no way we can do this without incurring overtime. Being properly staffed is not only important for the citizens and for our officers, it makes good budget sense over the long term. Quite frankly, I can't think of another community other than someplace like San Francisco or San Diego that provides the services that we do, that receives the accolades that we do, that has the challenges that we have with the resources that we have. How many places have over 100 events and 5 performance venues, and tens of thousands of cars traveling their roadways, and the Spalding I-95 Route 1 spoke, 16 hotels, over 1,700 rooms, 135 liquor licenses, Homeland Security targets, and a recreational water park with over 300,000 visitors in the summertime, and an active port, an average of 30 known homeless camps at any time, and a homeless shelter, 39 registered sex offenders at any time, and a trade port airport, and continued new development. How many places have all this? That concludes our budget presentation. I'd like to turn it back over to the mayor and to the commission and hopefully answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Chief, for your fine presentation. Once again, we're quite thankful that you've come in at 0, and we appreciate your analysis of what it took to get there. I'm sure we'll have questions for you. Anyone care to start the bidding? Councilor Dwyer.
I'm not implying by this question that I think these should be reflected in our budget, but just what are we likely to get for stimulus-related dollars that might affect the disposition of some of this, or what you're thinking about that?
In terms of personnel, we have applied for a COPS grant. I'm told through professional circles that New Hampshire is probably going to see funding for 25 police officer positions, that it's going to be very competitive, that a lot of departments from Nashua, Salem, to Portsmouth, to Dover, to Keene are all putting in for it. Right now, it's unknown what the criteria is that they're going to use to make that decision. It might be population-based, it might be based on crime, it might be based on whatever. I mean, but we have put in for a position. We have no idea whether or not we'll get it.
And what would that be, just to, I mean, where would that position fit?
It would be a police officer position. We would
Police
use it to fund the one that we reduced in the budget.
Thank you, Chief. Additional questions? Councilor Kennedy.
I just was wondering, in looking at the grant funds, it's gone down by about 93,000, which, given the economic times, I understand somewhat, but I was wondering if there's, besides the stimulus package, if there's, because I'm kind of curious, one of the things about the stimulus package I was curious about more is there a way to fund the resource officer? But the other thing is besides the stimulus package, is there any projected grants in the works for future police operations?
There are a number of different areas that you can apply to under the stimulus, the President's stimulus program. Police officers naturally is, our #1 goal. We'd like to get an officer funded through this if we can. The other area is, technology. And what am I missing? Court legal prosecution, and we've got a little creative, and we drafted a grant that we put in the hopes that maybe we might be able to get a dispatcher position. But again, that's all unknown.
Jerry.
Kennedy, I have been speaking with the chair of the school board and encouraging him, because there is monies available for schools, to see if they can, and he's not sure at this point, if they can fund that half of the SRO that they cut.
There is money available to the schools under a school safety grant. And another area that we're looking at is trying to get in partnership with the Portsmouth Housing Authority, is create a position specifically for our housing, senior housing and other housing as well, Gosling Meadows.
Chief, I'll throw this in because we're all in it in terms of seeking grants at this point, stimulus money, et cetera. The concern a council typically always has is, if one funds a position by a grant and the grant goes away, what world are we in? So, to what extent do you see grants upcoming that you're pursuing? I mean, even if you get them for a year, that's great. On the other hand, you have an issue of how do you manage your personnel and who keeps what job, and I'm sure it's labyrinthine. What do you foresee, if you can say at this time, about how many grant-funded positions or partial positions we might be looking at, and what their duration might be?
Boy, that would be speculation, Mayor. I have no idea what the criteria is that they're going to use to make these decisions in the end. Right now, the COPS grant is different from the COPS grant of old under the Clinton era, which was, 75, 50, 25%, and worked its way down, and you had to pick up the rest. The federal government will pay full benefits for 3 years, and then you have to commit to pay it for 12 months afterwards, and then if you cut the position, you're able to do that. You can do that.
Thanks, Chief. I guess from a management perspective, our concern would always be, we don't want to see turmoil because of grants. You know, I mean, they provide good things, but obviously that's something we don't want to have to see you have to deal with. Councilor Dwyer?
I noticed one of the few areas where you've had to increase is vehicle repair, and I wonder, is that about age of fleet, or is that about contracting out services in a different way? Is that a personnel-related change as well?
Can I ask where you are?
I'm on fleet maintenance, 043010.
We're in
Page 154.
we in the rolling stock appendix? Or?
No, just in the regular, and is that, and it says by outside, so I assume that's a change in cost related to outside services, or?
Our fleet is, with the help of the city manager, our fleet is really in good shape, but if you recall, there was a time there when we were sending the money for the school funding where we had to reduce our complement of cars that we were getting every year down to 2, and I think maybe 1 year. And that the maintenance is starting to catch up to that at this point.
Additional questions and comments?
Chief, does that include outfitting the new cruisers with two-way communications?
No.
That is not under
That's
maintenance?
not under maintenance.
Councilor Kennedy?
I really want to thank everyone for coming at zero and working hard at it, and I understand why it was hard for you guys. But with the animal control officer's position taken away, is there extra training that is being or needing to be provided to someone else to do that kind of job, or is that job just totally gone?
There is nobody else. I mean, that job will go to 20 hours a week, and there will be complaints from residents about squirrels and, you know, not getting picked up in the roadway and bats in their chimneys, and I mean, there will be complaints. I mean, that much we know. So, but there is nobody else to backfill that position.
So there's no additional training that maybe some other officers could have to support?
There are contractual issues that you bring up that we've had to deal with in the past, and it's two different, belongs to the jurisdiction of two different contractual bargaining groups, so there is really nobody that I can use to backfill.
Councilor Nobeline Claiborne?
First of all, thank you for coming in at 0%. I had a list of suggestions, and I won't say what they are. But I do have two questions. The Police Explorers, many of you know, are near and dear to my heart. My son Michael was in one of the pictures up there, receiving the award on behalf of the Special Olympics to the Portsmouth Police Explorers. And I know that it's cut $2,000, and I've been in touch with Officer Munson, and he and I are trying to work out some ways that they can raise money on their own to, I don't know if we'll be able to make up the $2,000, but we're attempting to raise some money so that perhaps they can make up some of that money. My other question is the traffic at the churches. I go to St. James every Sunday morning, and what concerns me is the number of elderly people that leave that parking lot when the mass gets out. There's just a lot of elderly people that attend the church. Have the churches ever been asked if they could absorb, if not all of that cost, some of that cost? You know, like how we used to share the SRO cost with the schools. Is it possible to share that cost with the churches? I don't know if that's ever been investigated.
Most certainly we can ask them if they're willing to do that. In the past, we actually went through this once before where we were going to cut this funding, and there was a huge outcry, absolutely huge, and we ended up, and the churches didn't have the money to pay for their own traffic control, so we ended up putting it back in the budget. So, I mean, we can certainly ask them if they're willing to pay. I have a good idea what their answer will be.
Counselor Dwyer?
This is a little point, but I'm a little confused about the animal control, because I thought that was reduced last year to meet your budget requirements.
No, we didn't reduce it last year.
Wasn't the idea of last year going from full to half?
No.
No, I don't.
Say the year before?
The year before,
The year before.
we did reduce the, some hours we did in the wintertime.
Oh, I see.
That's
Okay.
correct, the year before.
And then you brought it back up?
We
again.
did.
Okay.
Just for the winter, because that's a downtime.
So,
Additional questions? Going once. Comments? Going twice. Let me say then, we thank you again for your hard work, the hard work you do in the community and the hard work you did to bring this budget in. Again, we do not take it for granted. We appreciate that it is difficult. I know our citizens appreciate that it is as well. There may be additional dialogue, not because you haven't done a great job of coming in at zero, but we may have additional questions, but it's a fine presentation and a great result, and we thank you for your hard work.
And I would like to thank the city manager and the finance director for their help in working with us to get to where we have landed.
Noted for the record. Thank you. Thank you. We're done for the evening. Have a good night.
Done, I have to share.